Hello, and welcome to Subtle Historian for Sleep. Tonight, our journey takes us to a palace of breathtaking splendor and profound contradictions, a place of glittering gold and dark corners, of exquisite etiquette and quiet desperation. We are going to the Palace of Versailles during the reign of the Sun King, Louis XIV. Find a comfortable position and let the sounds of your world begin to recede. Allow your body to feel heavy, your mind to grow still. There is nothing required of you now but to breathe, and to let the grand, gilded facade of the past slowly peel away. Versailles, in our imagination, is a world of magnificent masquerade balls, of vast, geometric gardens, and of a king who declared himself the state. But this glittering world was a meticulously crafted illusion, supported by the invisible labor and silent suffering of thousands. Tonight, we will step through a hidden door and enter that unseen world. We will experience the precarious and psychologically grueling life of a servant in the Sun King's court. We will then trace the dramatic fall of a man whose ambition was seen as a challenge to the king himself. We will delve into the enduring mystery of a prisoner whose identity was a secret of the state. And finally, we will witness the oppressive, all-consuming daily rituals that define the life of the king. So, take a slow, deep breath, let go of the day. The great ticking clock of the palace is winding back, and our journey into the Gilded Cage is about to begin. Imagine yourself a part of a vast, invisible army. You are one of 10,000 souls who work, eat, and sleep within the walls of Versailles, yet whose existence is barely acknowledged. You do not live in the sunlit, opulent chambers. You spend your days cleaning. You live in a world of cramped, winding corridors, steep service stairs, and cold shared attic rooms, a stark and hidden contrast to the splendor all around you. Your life is not your own. It is governed by the relentless tyranny of the bell. A summons can come at any time, for any reason. Your sleep is therefore light and restless. Your meals are rushed and functional. You are in a state of constant readiness, waiting to be called to perform any task, no matter how menial or demeaning: to fetch water, to stoke a fire, to empty a chamber pot. Your primary duty, the lesson ingrained in you from your first day, is the burden of invisibility. You must learn to see everything and be seen by no one. You are trained to move silently along the edges of rooms, to keep your eyes downcast, to become as unremarkable as a piece of furniture. A clumsy step, a dropped tray, an ill-timed cacophony of these minor mistakes can draw unwanted attention, which can lead to public ridicule from a noble, a harsh punishment from a senior servant, or even dismissal. You are a ghost, but a ghost with eyes and ears. Your work grants you a dangerous proximity to the most intimate moments of the nobility. You help a duchess with the complex architecture of her gown. You stand silently in the corner as a duke dictates a private letter. You clean the chambers where secret liaisons have taken place. You see the raw, unguarded reality behind their powdered masks, the arguments, the tears, the illnesses, the political intrigues. This knowledge is not power. It is a dangerous burden. You must learn to forget what you see and hear, to become a vessel of secrets that you can never speak. And while you must strive to be invisible, you are also constantly being watched. A passing glance from a powerful courtier or a lingering look from a visiting prince is not a compliment. It is a cold reminder of your absolute powerlessness. It is a threat. In this world of rigid hierarchy, the power dynamics are absolute. A servant's refusal is unthinkable, and their word is worthless against that of a noble. Your physical safety, your reputation, and your continued employment depend entirely on the shifting moods and fleeting whims of those you serve. This oppressive atmosphere, this constant, unspoken threat of exploitation, is the grim reality of your position inside the Gilded Cage. While the servants toiled in obscurity, the nobles and ministers of the court lived their lives in the full glare of the public eye, playing a constant, high-stakes game of ambition and favor. In this glittering and dangerous world, no star rose higher or fell faster than that of Nicolas Fouquet, the king's superintendent of finances. His story is a quiet but powerful lesson in the nature of absolute power. Fouquet was, for a time, the second most powerful man in France. He was brilliant, charming, and possessed an almost unimaginable fortune. As the finance minister to the young King Louis XIV, he controlled the kingdom's treasury. He was a great patron of the arts, surrounding himself with the most talented artists, writers, and architects of the age. His ambition and exquisite tastes found their ultimate expression in the magnificent chateau he built for himself, Vaux-le-Vicomte. This was more than a home. It was a declaration, with its perfect, harmonious architecture, its lavishly decorated interiors, and its groundbreaking, geometrically perfect gardens. It was the most beautiful and sophisticated private residence in all of Europe. In many ways, it was the prototype for what Versailles would later become. In August of 1661, to celebrate the completion of his masterpiece and to honor his king, Fouquet hosted a fête of legendary extravagance. Imagine the scene: thousands of guests arriving at the chateau, which was illuminated by the light of countless candles. They were treated to a new play by the great Molière, performed on a stage set within the gardens themselves. The banquet that followed was a culinary marvel, and the evening concluded with a spectacular display of fireworks, a novelty at the time, that lit up the night sky. Fouquet intended the party as the ultimate tribute, a display of his devotion and his sophisticated ability to serve the crown. But the young King Louis XIV did not see it that way. As he walked through the perfect gardens and witnessed a spectacle that even he, the King of France, could not yet rival, he did not feel gratitude. He felt humiliation. He was confronted by the undeniable fact that his own subject possessed more taste, more wealth, and more magnificence than he did. This was not just a personal affront, it was a political danger. An absolute monarch could not be outdone. The king's reaction was cold and swift. He smiled through the rest of the evening, but the decision had been made. A few weeks later, Nicolas Fouquet was arrested by the king's captain of the musketeers, the historical D'Artagnan. He was charged with embezzlement and treason. His trial was a mere show, its outcome preordained. Though the court recommended banishment, Louis intervened personally, commuting the sentence to one of life imprisonment in the harshest of conditions. The man who had hosted the greatest party of the century would spend the next 2 decades locked away in a remote fortress, his name and his glory erased. In the immediate aftermath, Louis XIV confiscated all of Fouquet's assets. He then hired the very same team of artists, architects, and garden designers who had created the magnificent Vaux-le-Vicomte. The architect Lvov, the painter Lebrun, and the landscape designer Len Traand gave them a new, far grander project. They were to transform his father's modest hunting lodge at Versailles into a palace so vast and so magnificent that it would dwarf all others. It would become the ultimate symbol of royal power, ensuring that no subject, ever again, would dare to outshine the Sun King. The fate of Nicolas Fouquet demonstrates the king's power to erase a man from public life. But the reign of Louis XIV holds an even deeper and more chilling mystery. The story of a prisoner whose very identity was erased. It is the story of the man who has come to be known as the Man in the Iron Mask. For more than 3 decades, from 1669 until his death in 1703, a single, unnamed man was held as a prisoner of the state. He was moved between several of France's most formidable prisons, spending his final years in the infamous Bastille in the heart of Paris. Throughout his long captivity, under the watchful eye of the same jailer, one strict and bizarre condition was enforced. His face was to be perpetually hidden behind a mask. History and literature have sensationalized this as a mask of iron, but it was far more likely a mask of black velvet, held in place with metal clasps. While this was certainly more comfortable, its purpose was the same: to ensure that no one could ever identify him. The secrecy surrounding this prisoner was absolute. The few accounts we have from the time speak of the immense respect with which he was treated. He was given comfortable private rooms, fine clothing, and books to read. His meals were prepared by the governor's own chef. He was clearly a person of some significance. Yet, he was forbidden from speaking to anyone but his jailer and a physician. The guards were under strict orders that if the prisoner ever spoke of anything other than his immediate needs, they were to kill him without hesitation. After his death, the silence was made permanent. The walls of his cell were scraped and whitewashed. His furniture was burned, and all his clothing and effects were destroyed. A meticulous effort to eliminate any trace that he had ever existed. But such a profound secret could not help but create rumors. Over the centuries, historians and writers, most famously Voltaire and Alexandre Dumas, have speculated endlessly about who this mysterious man could have been. One of the most persistent and romantic theories is that he was the illegitimate older brother of King Louis XIV. In this version of the story, the existence of an elder twin or half-brother would have thrown the royal succession into chaos, and so he was hidden away from the world to protect the stability of the throne. Another, more historically plausible theory points to an Italian diplomat named Count Ercole Antonio Mattioli. Mattioli had double-crossed King Louis during sensitive treaty negotiations. His imprisonment would have been a harsh, personal, and secret revenge, a warning to others of the price of betraying the Sun King. Other candidates have been suggested over the years. A disgraced general, a courtier who knew too much, even Nicolas Fouquet himself. Though records of Fouquet's death in another prison make this highly unlikely, the truth is, we will probably never know. The state's efforts to erase him were too successful. We are left with only the ghost of a story, a man treated with deference but kept in absolute isolation, a person whose face was never seen, whose name was never spoken. The man in the iron mask remains one of history's most compelling unsolved mysteries. He is a silent and enduring symbol of the absolute power of the French monarchy, a quiet testament to the fact that the Sun King had the power not only to take a man as freedom but to take his very identity, leaving behind nothing but a question mark, hidden forever behind a velvet mask. From the hidden worlds of the servant and the secret prisoner, we now turn to the most public life in all of France, a life that was a constant, unvarying, and deliberate performance. We will now observe the daily routine of the man at the very center of this universe, King Louis XIV himself. The Sun King's day was a gilded cage of his own design. His every action, from waking to sleeping, was transformed into a complex public ceremony, a ritual designed to demonstrate his divine authority and to domesticate the powerful French nobility. The day began with the lever, the waking ceremony. Imagine a series of grand, interconnected antechambers outside the king's bedchamber, all crowded with hundreds of courtiers, their silks rustling, their voices a low murmur. They were not there to socialize. They were there to be seen, hoping to catch the king's eye. Admittance to these rooms was strictly controlled by rank. The closer you were allowed to the bedchamber, the higher your status. The ceremony itself unfolded in 6 distinct stages. Only the most elite, high-ranking nobles were granted the grand entree, the right to enter the bedchamber itself and witness the king being woken by his first valet. They would watch in reverent silence as the king was washed, shaved, and dressed. Every small act was a coveted honor. The courtier chosen to help the king put on his right sleeve was the envy of all. This was the genius of the system. The most powerful dukes and princes in the land, men who might have plotted rebellions from their country estates, were instead in Versailles competing for the trivial honor of helping the king with his shirt. After attending a public mass in the chapel, the king would preside over his various councils, governing the affairs of state. But even here, the performance continued. His ministers would stand while he sat, and he ruled with an aura of detached, absolute authority. His midday meal, dinner, was another public spectacle. The king would dine alone at a table set up in his chambers, facing a crowd of silent, standing male courtiers. The meal was a procession of dozens of dishes, brought from the kitchens in a formal parade. Each one tasted for poison before being presented to him. The king ate with a hearty appetite, but the purpose of the event was not just his sustenance. It was to display the bounty of his kingdom and his own semi-divine status. The afternoon might be spent hunting, another public display of his royal vigor, or walking in the magnificent gardens he had created. Even here, he was followed at a respectful distance by the court. His every step was observed. The day ended as it began, with the couche, the equally elaborate and public ceremony of the king's retiring to bed. The same crowds would assemble, the same rituals would be observed in reverse. The courtier who was granted the honor of holding the candle as the king got into bed was considered to have had a most successful day. This was Louis XIV's life, a constant, exhausting performance from the moment he opened his eyes to the moment he closed them. He had created Versailles as a magnificent cage to contain the ambitions of his nobility, but in doing so, he had also created an inescapable one for himself. His body was not his own. It was an instrument of the state. His life was a ritual, a symbol, a relentless and lonely performance of absolute power. Our journey through the gilded and shadowed world of Versailles is now at an end. We have walked the cold, hidden corridors with the servant, feeling the constant, quiet weight of their invisibility and precariousness. We have witnessed the brilliant rise and swift, merciless fall of Nicolas Fouquet, a man whose ambition taught a king the art of jealousy. We have stood before the mystery of the masked prisoner, a silent testament to a king's power to erase a man from the world. And we have observed the Sun King himself, a monarch so powerful that he became a prisoner of his own magnificent, daily performance. Versailles was more than a palace. It was a finely tuned instrument of power, a world of exquisite beauty and profound psychological cruelty. The servant in the attic and the king in his state bed were both bound by its rigid and unyielding rules. It was a place where a dropped plate could be a catastrophe, a lavish party could be a declaration of war, and the highest honor was to watch a man put on his shirt. The splendor was real, but so was the suffering that made it possible. But the clocks of Versailles have long since stopped ticking. The gilded halls are now quiet, filled only with the echoes of the past. The intricate rituals are over. The ambitions and the anxieties of the court have all dissolved into the silence of history. And so, it is time for your own day to come to a peaceful close. The demands and performances of your own life can be set aside. You are not in a cold attic room, nor are you on a public stage. You are in a place of quiet, safety, and rest. Let the great, silent halls of the palace become a landscape for your mind to find stillness. Let the stories of this distant, glittering world gently fade, leaving only a deep and profound peace. There are no more bells to answer. There is only the calm, steady rhythm of your own breath, carrying you towards sleep. Rest now. Sleep well.